What's going on, everyone? My name's Tetsuo Infinite, and in the spirit of Halloween today, we're going to take a look at Generation Zero and see what it would be like if it were a survival horror game. This is the second video where I'm taking a look at Generation Zero through the lens of a different video game genre and how it would impact the game. I've taken more of a creative swing at this one, trying to really imagine a unique horror experience fitting for Generation Zero. So remember, if you like the video, to hit that thumbs up button and to subscribe for more. To some folks, Gen Z might already be a survival horror game. The machines and atmosphere can be genuinely unnerving at times, but we're going to take things to a kind of more intense level here. I've always been a fan of the horror classics like The Thing, Nightmare on Elm Street, Altered States, and the Halloween series, but as I grew up, I found I'm also a huge fan of niche dystopian sci-fi horror, which is pretty fitting for the game, if I do say so myself. Last time, when we looked at Generation Zero as an immersive sim, we mostly looked at things that would change gameplay-wise, but this time, we're going to hit a couple major plot points in the game and tweak them to be a little bit more horrific. Now first up, let's look at the gameplay and how it could be switched up to better fit the survival horror genre. And the first big one is bringing back the grid inventory. Its limitations fit perfectly into the survival genre, and when looking back on classics like the OG Resident Evil, grid inventories work pretty dang good for horror games, and can really add tension to inventory management. Not gonna lie, sometimes I kinda miss the old grid inventory in GZ. There was something really manual feeling about it. But as a survival horror though, you wouldn't have the skills to upgrade for a bigger inventory, and you would maybe be more limited, starting with only 2 rows of 8 slots to use in your inventory. But then maybe you would have a craftable backpack that could increase your carrying capacity to 4 rows of 8, offering a bit more space to work with, but overall, your carrying capacity would be pretty limited. Ammo counts would probably be heavily reduced as well. Then the machines, again, in this hypothetical world where there is no budget or realistic time constraints or any of that stuff, would have a very different functionality for their components. Now instead you would have 3 types of components: mobility components, weapon components, and optics components. You can damage these to affect the machine, like slowing them down or blinding them, but actually killing the machine would take a lot more effort to finish it off. One big thing that lets down the horror aspect of the machines in Generation Zero is that they are fully and most times easily killable. As a hypothetical survival horror video game though, killing the machines would be a huge risk, as dying could maybe mean losing a lot more progress, or maybe even having a limited life and save system. Again, in my head, this would be a really difficult game actually, just to kind of amp the horror side up, and make those first day vibes you have in Generation Zero stick around for potentially even the entire game. You also wouldn't have weapon classes, just rusty, dilapidated guns. And lastly, as a final spicy idea, some sort of survival-based wound system. You'd have multiple types of healing items to balance in your inventory for dealing with bullet wounds, fractures, and broken bones, lacerations, and even things to deal with toxicity buildup from the gas that the machines produce. All of this would add up to a pretty crazy challenge in the end. More difficult to kill machines, no power creep from weapon classes, and finally a damage system that could potentially really hinder you along the way. I think it would transform GZ into a horror game that you'd actually have to really survive through. We'd also see some massive changes to the world design. As a survival horror game, things would have to be much more imposing, so we do away with pretty much any buildings being actually intact. The first house at Ittervik? Bombed out from some unknown machine at sea. The Ibahoman Church? Nah, more like just a huge crater with bits and pieces of church left lying around. Forests would have much more destroyed land and signs of large machines pushing trees over and crushing the forest paths. The total destruction of the environment would really show the machines as cold and ruthless killing machines that you actually would maybe be better off avoiding, and this could all be done without even showing you a machine at all, and just using the environment to tell a story. Opening up the game, we do away with the rolling text bit and instead just have an explosion, some ear ringing, then you coming to on the beach, surrounded by your dead friends, ripped apart by bullets and shrapnel from the explosion, but you somehow managed to survive. You'd run into your first machine just outside of Stenhaga Farm, soaked in blood and standing over the dead body of a soldier. You'd have one lone runner. Scattered all around it would be the gore and viscera of other soldiers and civilians, clearly having tried to attempt to flee Saltham. This is one thing that would change a lot environmentally. Not only would buildings and cities be sites of destruction and pure carnage, but dead bodies would also be much more visceral, just to further add to the fact that these machines are out here straight up brutalizing dudes as they go through the Swedish countryside. Now, at this stage of the game, you're still fully unarmed, so you don't even have the option of combat. If you alert the machine, just a few bullets will kill you, and if you're hit by even one bullet, you'll have a wound to deal with. If hit in the lower body, you'll have a slowness effect, and no matter where you're injured, you'd have passive health loss. This maybe would be a good place for a kind of wound tutorial on what healing items to use and when. After sneaking past the machine and making your way to Saltham, you'd finally come across your first weapon in the bunker. Though, again, this bunker would be all bombed out and totally destroyed. Now that you're finally armed, you can have your first taste of what combat is. With 3 bullets, you'd have 3 chances to damage a runner and see what each effect would be. From slowing it and making it clumsy by damaging its legs, making it blind and hyper-aggressive by shooting its optics, or shooting its weapon off and having it enter into a blitz melee rush mode at you. This would also be the risk that you run every time you fight a machine, meaning if you did plan on destroying a machine, you'd need to plan carefully for how you would go about it, prioritizing each component and maybe using Generation Zero's persistent damage feature to take down machines after a few hit and runs. Having found a tattered note in the shelter saying that the elderly, unfit to fight, and children would be evacuated at sea and all others would go to the main bunker more inland, you'd now have your next objective. Reach that bunker and find the other survivors. It would also give a chance for the machines to commit some good old grade A war crimes against humanity if you realize that those elderly, sick, and children were the bodies you had seen around the runner just previously. But the mid-game. Man, this is something I've actually been thinking on a bit because I'm going much more in detail here for this video in comparison to my last. Does the mid-game need to change that much in light of a different video game genre? The thing about Generation Zero's mid-game is that it's heavily routine-based. You head to a bunker, unlock it, and complete missions, then you go clear a bunker and do more missions, then rinse and repeat until you get to the end, where the Russians contact you to get to the final mission. I don't think this would change too much in the survival horror setting. Combat would be much more possible during the mid-game, but still, the effort would be so much more time-consuming than what we have currently. Certain missions would probably need to be tweaked to have less enemies, and missions involving killing tanks or harvesters would instead be missions observing these machines, instead of fighting them head-on. But I think the mid-game could stay mostly the same as what we see currently in the game. The ending of the game is where we'd see our strongest moments of horror, though. As you cleared each bunker, you would get a bit of dialogue from von Ulmer, and that would be the thing leading you on to the final mission instead of contacting the Soviets. As you receive each message from von Ulmer, it would portray him as almost a split personality. One side empathetic and remorseful for what he's done, literally telling you the location of the next bunker, and the other having a seeming god complex, arrogantly taunting you to the next region instead of telling you outright the location of the next bunker. He'd flip like this at random with each bunker, maybe even having 2 separate lines of dialogue chosen at random when you clear the bunker. This would be really cool for replay value, I think. Once you gained access to the faux facility, things would take a clear turn to the crazy, with von Ulmer boasting of being a transcendental Vasen and a Mannequins Mahingut, as he was physically merged with the Phoenix software in an attempt to save him from a terminal illness. Walking through von Ulmer's laboratory, we'd find desecrated bodies half merged with machinery rotting inside of cages, whiteboards with notes on machine-to-human interfacing, and lastly, before his personal office, you'd find notes on a Armageddon machine, something that didn't need a human interface and was fully autonomous. A massive water, land, and air-based machine that was capable of nuking countries, Metal Gear style.
A bipedal tank. Metal Gear. What?
Players would then have a chance to connect the dots between the intro of the game till now. The same all-terrain death machine would have been the one who killed their friends way back at the beginning of the game. Finally, opening the door to von Ulmer's office, we'd find him suspended in midair, with a huge hulking machine fused into his back, propping him up. Wires attached to a small motor on the side of his head, showing that his brain had been fully replaced with a miniature computer. Now, at this point, you'd have a choice as the player. One, to turn around and walk away and just let him do his thing, with von Ulmer offering you personal safety. Or two, to unplug the machine and bear the consequences of the Armageddon machine having no master to keep it under control. If you pick the first option and leave von Ulmer alive, you would get to the exit only to have the building and everything around you explode. Von Ulmer had ordered the machine to destroy the location to eliminate the only threat he and Phoenix had, as it had turned out that he uploaded the core Phoenix program into the Armageddon machine, and the Armageddon machine was able to continue in his place. And if you chose the second option and unplug Svant from the wall, you'd get a final piece of dialogue from him. The sympathetic human side continuing to frantically apologize for what he had done for a few short moments before he stopped breathing. The game would then simply just fade to black. In both cases, afterwards, you'd get a cutscene of a massive machine emerging from the Baltic Sea to fly towards Stockholm, and just leave the rest up to the player's imagination, or maybe a sequel. Cheesy 2 confirmed? Maybe. But I feel like this would add to the whole horror of the story, you having no control of the fact that this is all set in motion, and nothing you do with von Ulmer changes a dang thing about the machine apocalypse. Hopefully you've enjoyed this reimagining of Generation Zero. I really tried to kind of emulate horror movies and the fact that the end is where shit usually hits the fan, and is where you see the most horror in the movie, but I also tried to tie that all into a game that uses mostly Generation Zero's gameplay as the foundation, then adds only a few things to tweak the experience along the way. If you have ideas on how Generation Zero could be an even crazier survival horror game, pop them in the comments down below. But for now, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Happy Halloween, my dudes.